So, Spider-Man Homecoming is... How to describe it? Well, first off, it was often spoken of as being one where Marvel kind of liberated it from Sony's hands. And it was kind of interesting because I graduated high school right around the time that the first Spider-Man came out, and started college around that time, and then Spider-Man 2 came out shortly thereafter. And then I actually liked Spider-Man 3 because I like Sam Raimi, and I liked the story, and I liked a lot of the stories that they did with that franchise of Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi Spider-Man. But then when they did the reboot, I wasn't quite so sure. They definitely had a lot of the spectacle that you needed in a Marvel movie where it's about a superhero with all kinds of supernatural powers. One thing that I never could stand was how they had to kind of shoehorn Stan Lee in. And here they do it a little bit more organically, so that it's very brief, it's not overwhelming, it's just, oh, there's Stan Lee. And it's just a brief glimpse. It's not a, hey, it's Stan the Man Lee. Excelsior! Anyway, no, it wasn't anything like that. But all in all, let's just sort of get going with it. It basically feels a lot like Deadpool, but a more kid-friendly version. You have, Deadpool was R-rated, so it was like, yeah, nobody should be taking their kid to see that. This one, you can actually take the kids to go see. It's very family-friendly. It's not too dark or sinister. It keeps the beats relatively, constant and steady. And it knows when to be slow and quiet. It knows when to be fast-paced. And it doesn't overwhelm you too much. The acting has the right amount of intensity at the right spots. And I do have to say, I really appreciated the fact that they didn't bother going into the origin for a second or third time in this case. Because both of the previous incarnations of Spider-Man, with Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire, they both had to go into the origin in a different way. In the Sam Raimi version, the spider silk launcher is an organic thing that he just develops. And if I remember correctly, in the Amazing Spider-Man films, it was the mechanical device, like in the comics. So it was kind of interesting when they took it in those two different directions. In this instance, it's the mechanical. They try and stick with something a little bit closer to the comics. This film has a fair amount of Tony Stark, as played by Robert Downey Jr., and it has a couple of cameos from some of the other Iron Man cast. What's his name? Jon Favreau returns as Happy, and Gwyneth Paltrow returns as Pepper Potts. So, even though we were led to believe in or Captain America Civil War, which, I don't know, should have been the Avengers Civil War or Marvel Civil War. Anyway, even though we're led to believe that they were kind of split up and she gave up the company, apparently that's not the case. I think a lot of the fans reacted so negatively to that they just made it seem like they were having an out, that they were having a temporary separation as a couple. And anyway, so that was a pretty cool little bit with the cameos, and they're organic to the story. So you will see some characters that you've seen before, so it feels like part of a contiguous universe. Captain America also does a couple of cameos, but only on video. But still, it's pretty cool. In terms of the villain, Michael Keaton is a really good villain. He, of course, plays the Vulture, as most people know. And they do an interesting job in terms of characterizing him, because instead of having the character kind of feeding on people's life force in order to make himself kind of more young and vital. The character of Toombs, who is the Vulture, is actually just an aging scrapper demolition guy. He basically is a blue collar guy who owns his company, and after the events of the Avengers, when New York gets attacked, he starts taking apart all of the alien hardware. Well, you barely recognize Michael Keaton in his role, but you can see that he's a good guy. He knows what he's doing. And then the government and Tony Stark come in and take over the operation. It's like they don't even trust him after he's bid to get this contract. So I thought that was kind of an unfortunate backstory that really makes you sympathize with him and understand his plight. You know, he's trying his best to make a living and support his wife and kid. And you end up, sympathizing for the villain, but at the same time you see that he really has gone very far. Now, the character of the Vulture here, in this instance, is not someone who sort of feeds on the life force of others, but who actually, uses his flight suit as a means to scrounge for high-tech equipment. He uses it as an infiltration suit. And the Vulture look comes partially because he wears an old flight jacket with a fur collar on it. And the fur collar looks a little bit like the sort of plumage around the neck of a vulture. So they did a really cool job integrating that as part of the costume. And basically the idea is that this is what would happen if some regular guys with just a basic knowledge of electronics and electrical work from the human school of electronics and electricals started integrating alien technology into their own technology and saw what they could do. They use alien technology to amp it up. So you end up with sort of a goon of his being the Shocker, which I thought was actually really cool. They didn't build him up too much. He was just sort of a hired goon, and one guy thinks that he can take on the Vulture, and Toombs just flat out kills him with one of their ray guns, and then hands the Shocker glove over to another guy and says, "Fine, now you're the Shocker." And I thought that was really cool. It showed that with these villains, it really is an interchangeable thing. It's just a man or a woman with the equipment and no concern for anyone but themselves. And there's that whole question of what makes the person. Is it the costume, or is it something inside of the costume, the person inside of it? So Spider-Man, Peter Parker, is... And some people tried to say, oh, well, Spider-Man has a brother in this one. No, he doesn't. He has a best friend who's like an overweight Polynesian guy. He might be Hispanic. I didn't catch his name, but, the point is he's a person of color. And they actually bother to populate this film with people of color. Toombs has a daughter who is a woman of color. She's half black, at least as far as I can tell. I think that's meant to be the idea. Anyway, beautiful girl. And Flash Thompson is an Indian kid. And it's simply a matter there of there's no reason not to have a person of color in the role. It's meant to be Queens. Queens is pretty diverse. It's just kind of how it is. And I think it feels as much of... I keep saying organic, but it does. It feels integral to the larger Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I think that's largely because Marvel just took the reins on this. They were like, okay, Sony, Columbia, you can help produce, you can help get some of the residuals from this, but we're taking the reins on this. We have our own studio, so we're going to produce a fair portion of this and get this really done right. And I think they managed to do it. They build in a lot of the sense of humor. I don't think they got the mouthiness quite to the level that The Amazing Spider-Man did. The Amazing Spider-Man had the proper amount of mouth on him. And the idea that he was kind of an awkward, shy person who, as soon as he put on the costume, could suddenly mouth off. Not unlike an internet commenter or a YouTube troll. So, with all that being said, the plot itself, I'm not really going to spoil for you because it's good. It's a good story with lots of little ins and outs, twists and turns, little changes of location and whatnot. The title Homecoming is not just, oh, well, Spider-Man's finally being produced by Marvel, so he's coming back home. No, it actually makes sense to the story itself. And like I said, I love that they didn't go back and introduce, how he got his powers. They didn't make it like, oh, right away, here's jeez, I can't remember her name. The young woman who played Mary Jane in the first trilogy of Spider-Man films. Kirsten Dunst. That's it. Anyway, she was introduced right away, whereas Gwen Stacy was introduced later, which I was like, okay. Except that Gwen Stacy was Peter Parker's first love interest, and Mary Jane came later. He's still in high school, which is good because Spider-Man existed for a long time as a high school student before he finally moved on to college. And the other advantage there, by hiring a high school-aged actor, is that you can end up producing a lot more Spider-Man movies, and you can keep them coming. You can have different stories every time. In this one, you feel like you've gone through weeks of his exploits. You get some lovely montages of him helping the community there around Queens and the New York area. And he's not above, just doing the most basic stuff. So I kind of liked it. It's a good feeling movie. It leaves you feeling good. That's important. In a lot of these Marvel movies, they have to leave you feeling good. What was it? Red Letter Media kind of pointed out that Captain America Civil War and I think it was Captain America the Winter Soldier, neither of them left you feeling good and wanting to see more adventures. Another aspect I like to this one is that they don't make you feel like, this is just an everyman kind of character. Peter is a unique person. Yes, he's kind of an everyman, but at the same time, he's not an everyman. He's not just some everyman that, can be you or me or anything as long as you get the powers. They show some of the character development and some of the aspects to who he is that makes him unique, that he is really smart, even among smart kids at his school, and that his school itself is a specialized, charter school kind of academy for science and technology. I thought that was really cool. I thought it was an interesting element that lended something to the story without taking anything away. And it wasn't there just for flavor. You had a lot of stuff in the film that was not introduced just for flavor. It was introduced because it needed to be used in the story. One interesting element I just sort of caught on to. was they were able to feature the Death Star and Star Wars as a little uh, part of the Marvel cinema, part of the story. One of the little plot elements is his best friend wants to put together a Lego Death Star, and you can feature that because Marvel and Star Wars both belong to Disney now, and you wouldn't have had that like 5 years ago, even 10 years ago, certainly not. Let's see. All of this kind of takes place around the time of Captain America Civil War. It's like just after Captain America Civil War is when you start the story. And they're kind of moving everything from the Avengers Tower in New York to the Avengers headquarters in upstate New York. So I thought that was kind of an interesting element, that it's all kind of within that. And Tony doesn't play a huge part, but when he comes in, he definitely plays the part of, look, kid, I've been where you are, suddenly, and on top of that, because Peter doesn't have a father and he doesn't have his Uncle Ben, Tony understands, this kid does need a bit of a father figure. He does need someone in his life to kind of straighten him out when he screws up. And there are points in the story where he screws up because he's still new, even though he thinks he's ready for everything. And one thing I really liked about the end is they point out that Peter, even with all of his power and everything that he's done in the movie, he is humbled by it. Because you have a really classic part of the story where our hero is buried under rubble. A bit of a spoiler here. And he has to get himself out. And he's just in his old costume. Not the really high-tech one that Tony gave him. Tony's given him this really high-tech Spider-Man suit that he can run around in. It has a computer, a heads-up display, all kinds of different modes that help him fight crime even more effectively. And he's like, if I can't get out of this without the suit, so he's like, come on, Peter, and it doesn't work. And then he has to say, come on, Spider-Man, because he has to believe in himself. He has to see himself when he puts on that mask as more than just Peter Parker. He isn't Spider-Man because of the costume. He's Spider-Man because of who he is. And in the end, he feels very humble about it. You don't get the whole being beaten over the head with great power comes great responsibility and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of the subtext. In this, you get that he's not quite ready to become the full-fledged Spider-Man. He's still very young, and he's suddenly realizing it. He's suddenly understanding just how inexperienced he is, the fact that he has to train, and the fact that he still has a full life ahead of him as Peter Parker, and he can't just give that up and become an Avenger full-time. So that was really good. I also loved Marissa Tomei as Aunt May. Of course, a lot of people are like, oh, Marissa Tomei is so hot. Yes, of course, Marissa Tomei is beautiful and, very attractive and everything. She always has been. Part of casting her is the fact that Tony kind of thinks she's cute, and the fact that Peter Parker's best friend thinks she's cute, and it's all just kind of in the subtext. It's not very obvious or outspoken. Nobody just comes out and says it overtly. Oh, your aunt's hot. It's like, no, it's just there. It's like, anyway. That being said, she plays the part very well, sort of stepping in as Peter's caretaker. She does a good job of being Peter's mom. And I like the fact that they didn't choose an actress who was like over 60, because that makes a huge difference. Having an Aunt May who's too old really puts a burden on the actress, it puts a burden on the casting, and it was one of the main stumbling blocks for the first Spider-Man films that came out around the 2000s. Huge problem there because the actress playing Aunt May is like a grandma, and instead it could be just someone who's old enough to be his mom, which would make sense. And as he grows older, she becomes old enough to be a grandma or whatever. It makes more sense. Casting Sally Field as that was a good choice when they did The Amazing Spider-Man, because it worked. She was old enough to be an older Aunt May, but still young enough to just kind of be an older sister to, Peter's parents. With all that being said, I thought it was a little bit odd with some of the directions that they chose for the little scenes, making Flash Thompson into another bright, talented kid. But at this school, that made sense instead of making him into an athlete. Other stuff, some of the little bits of dialogue, it was like, well, they're teenagers, they're awkward, they're going through all this stuff, okay. In all, I think that it works. It's a way more fun film. They really clearly looked at all the little aspects of the scenes and the vignettes and all the side stuff and made sure that it held together integrally as a story. And that's where I'm talking about comparing it to Deadpool. In terms of the tight writing, the humor, the friend who's like incredibly reactive to all of that. I kind of want to see Spider-Man and Deadpool play opposite one another in like maybe some little side featurette, just because that's a common thing in some of the little fan fiction and fan art where Spider-Man and Deadpool are goofing around. All that being said, though, they managed to make a really good Spider-Man movie out of all of this. They kept it fun, they kept it fairly light, and they were willing to have the character not always look competent, which is important, because he is just a kid starting out in the world of being a superhero. And I also like the fact that they didn't choose someone who was like, they cast a person who has a very round face instead of but has that youthful look to him, instead of someone like Andrew Garfield who has more of the Hollywood good looks. Peter Parker looks like someone you would just look right past. Although in some scenes they do bother to make him look really cute, so whatever. I mean, he's got to be good looking enough to be a heartthrob anyway for the movies. But in terms of movie attractiveness, he's about average. So how does it rate overall? Like, out of 5, my usual rating system. It gets a 4.5 out of 5. I don't want to give it a full 5 out of 5 just because there were some aspects I could have wished for a little bit more grit to it, because it just felt a little bit too fluffy at some points, where it was trying too hard to be silly and goofy and cartoony. But I understand what they were going for. They were going for a Spider-Man who was a comic book Spider-Man, and was very much an interpretation of the current Marvel Spider-Man character, without it being too much grit. they wanted it to be more like Deadpool and Guardians of the Galaxy and everything. So you have your pop songs that are kind of shoehorned in as just part of things. So it works, it's fun, you'll enjoy it, and you'll probably want to watch it a few times with, your teenagers and whatever. Um, they do a decent job with it. I genuinely enjoyed it, and I think you will too. So go ahead and check it out. 4.5 out of 5. You heard it here first, folks. Bye-bye.